The fluorescent lights of that chain restaurant in downtown Phoenix still haunt my dreams sometimes. It was supposed to be a celebration dinner, our 5th wedding anniversary. But instead, it became the night that shattered everything I thought I knew about love, respect, and my own worth. I remember sitting across from Marcus, my hands nervously smoothing down the fabric of my size 22 dress, the one I had bought specifically for this occasion because it was the only thing in my closet that still fit properly. The weight had crept up on me slowly over the years, pound by pound, until I found myself carrying 240 pounds on my 5'4" frame. I had always been curvy, but marriage, 2 pregnancies, and the stress of juggling motherhood with a demanding job had taken their toll on my body. Marcus used to tell me he loved me no matter what, that my weight didn't matter to him. But lately, his eyes had grown cold whenever he looked at me. The restaurant was packed that Tuesday evening, filled with families celebrating birthdays, couples on dates, and groups of friends catching up over appetizers and cocktails. I had chosen this place because it was where we had our first official date 7 years earlier, back when I was 160 pounds and Marcus couldn't keep his hands off me. The irony wasn't lost on me as I sat there, watching him scroll through his phone instead of engaging in conversation, his jaw set in that familiar expression of irritation that had become his default whenever we were together. The waitress, a young blonde girl who couldn't have been more than 22, approached our table with the kind of enthusiasm that only comes from working for tips. She was everything I used to be, thin, confident, radiant, and I watched as Marcus's entire demeanor changed when she smiled at him. His back straightened, his voice became warmer, and for the first time in months, I saw him genuinely smile. When the waitress asked for our drink orders, Marcus ordered his usual beer, and then turned to me with an expression I had never seen before, a mixture of disgust and embarrassment that made my stomach drop. The words that came out of his mouth next would replay in my mind for months afterward, each syllable cutting deeper than any physical pain I had ever experienced. He told the waitress, loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear, that I should probably stick to water since I clearly didn't need any extra calories. The casual cruelty in his voice, the way he chuckled as if he had just made a harmless joke, the complete lack of regard for my feelings. It all hit me like a physical blow. I felt my cheeks burn with shame as I noticed other diners turning to look at us, their expressions ranging from pity to secondhand embarrassment. The waitress's smile faltered, and she quickly mumbled something about giving us a few more minutes before hurrying away from our table. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of humiliation and growing rage that I kept buried deep inside my chest. Marcus continued to make comments throughout dinner, criticizing my food choices, suggesting I order a salad instead of the pasta I had been craving, and even going so far as to flag down the waitress to change my order without consulting me first. Each comment felt like another nail in the coffin of our marriage. Another confirmation that the man I had loved and trusted had become someone I no longer recognized. The other diners continued to steal glances at our table, and I could practically hear their whispered conversations about the poor fat woman being berated by her husband. I wanted to disappear, to sink through the floor, and never have to face another human being again. The shame was overwhelming, but underneath it, something else was beginning to stir, a spark of defiance that I hadn't felt in years. As we walked to the car that night, Marcus continued his verbal assault, telling me that he was embarrassed to be seen with me, that I had let myself go, and that he didn't know how much longer he could pretend to be attracted to someone who had given up on herself. His words echoed in the empty parking lot, and I realized that this wasn't just about my weight. This was about power, control, and his need to tear me down to make himself feel better. That night, as I lay in bed listening to him snore beside me, I made a decision that would change everything. I was done being his victim, done accepting his cruelty, and done believing that I deserved to be treated with anything less than basic human dignity. The morning after that devastating anniversary dinner, I woke up with a determination I hadn't felt in years, but also with the crushing weight of reality pressing down on my chest. Marcus had already left for work without saying goodbye, leaving behind only the lingering scent of his cologne and a coffee mug in the sink that I would inevitably have to wash. I I stood in front of our bedroom mirror, really looking at myself for the first time in months, seeing not just the extra weight, but the defeat in my eyes, the way my shoulders slumped forward as if I was trying to make myself smaller and less noticeable. The woman staring back at me was a stranger, someone who had lost herself somewhere between diaper changes, sleepless nights, and a marriage that had slowly eroded her self-worth. I traced the stretch marks on my stomach, the evidence of carrying two beautiful children who were now 8 and 10 years old, and I realized that I had been so focused on taking care of everyone else that I had completely forgotten how to take care of myself. The kids, Emma and Jake, were getting ready for school in their usual chaotic fashion, and I went through the motions of making breakfast, packing lunches, and ensuring they had everything they needed for their day. Emma, my perceptive 10-year-old, noticed that something was different about me that morning and asked if I was okay with the kind of innocent concern that only children possess. I forced a smile and told her I was fine. But inside, I was anything but fine. I was angry, hurt, and most importantly, I was finally ready to do something about it. After dropping the kids off at Lincoln Elementary, I sat in my car in the parking lot and made a list on my phone of all the things I wanted to change about my life. The list was longer than I expected, covering everything from my physical health to my career goals to the toxic dynamic that had developed in my marriage. At the top of the list, written in bold letters, was one simple word: myself. My first stop was the local gym, a place I hadn't set foot in since before Emma was born. The LA Fitness on Camelback Road was intimidating, filled with people who looked like they belonged there. People who knew what they were doing and moved with confidence through the maze of equipment. I felt like an imposter in my old workout clothes that were too tight and too worn, but I forced myself to walk through those doors anyway. The membership consultant, an enthusiastic young man named Tyler, didn't judge me when I explained that I was starting from zero, that I hadn't exercised regularly in over a decade, and that I needed help figuring out where to begin. He set me up with a basic membership and a complimentary session with a personal trainer. And for the first time in months, I felt like I was taking a step in the right direction. The gym was busy even at 10 in the morning, filled with stay-at-home moms like myself, retirees, and people who worked night shifts, and I realized that I wasn't the only one trying to make a change. That afternoon, I cleaned out our pantry and refrigerator with the same determination I had felt that morning, throwing away the processed foods, the sugary snacks, and the frozen dinners that had become staples in our household. I replaced them with fresh vegetables, lean proteins, and whole grains, spending more money than I usually would on groceries, but viewing it as an investment in my future, rather than an expense. When Marcus came home that evening, he noticed the changes immediately, and made several sarcastic comments about my sudden health kick, predicting that it would last about as long as my previous attempts at self-improvement. His words stung, but they also fueled my determination in a way that surprised me. I realized that his lack of support, his obvious desire to keep me down and dependent on him, was just another reason why I needed to succeed. Not for him, but for myself and for my children who deserved to see their mother as a strong, confident woman. 3 weeks into my transformation journey, the initial excitement had worn off, and the harsh reality of changing a lifetime of habits had set in with brutal force. My body ached in places I didn't even know could ache, and every morning felt like a battle between the old me who wanted to stay in bed and the new me who was determined to make it to the gym before the kids woke up. The 5:30 a.m. alarm became my enemy, and my salvation all at once, dragging me from the comfort of sleep into the cold Arizona morning, where I would stumble through my workout routine with the dedication of someone who had finally found her purpose. Sarah, my personal trainer, was a former Marine who didn't believe in excuses and pushed me harder than I had ever been pushed in my life. She taught me that strength wasn't just about lifting weights or running on a treadmill. It was about showing up even when every fiber of your being wanted to quit, about pushing through the voice in your head that whispered you weren't good enough, strong enough, or worthy enough to succeed. The changes in my daily routine rippled through every aspect of my life, creating tension in places I hadn't expected. Marcus's criticism intensified as he watched me meal prep on Sunday afternoons, making snide comments about my dedication to what he called my latest fad diet. He seemed personally offended by my early morning gym sessions, complaining that I was being selfish by leaving him to handle the morning routine with the kids, even though he had never helped with that routine before my transformation began. His friends at work apparently found my new lifestyle amusing, and he would come home with stories about how they joked about his wife's midlife crisis, each comment designed to chip away at my resolve. The isolation was perhaps the hardest part. Losing the comfort of emotional eating meant facing my feelings head-on, without the buffer of food to numb the pain of a failing marriage and years of accumulated hurt. But something unexpected began to happen around the 4th week that kept me going when everything else felt impossible. The scale now, which had been my enemy for so long, finally started moving in the right direction, and I lost my first 10 pounds. More importantly, I began to sleep better. My energy levels increased dramatically, and for the first time in years, I caught myself smiling at my reflection in the gym mirrors. The other women at the gym, initially intimidating figures who seemed to belong to a world I could never access, began to nod in recognition when they saw me, and a few even offered encouragement or tips about form and technique. Emma and Jake noticed the changes too, commenting on how much happier I seemed, how I had more energy to play with them after school, and how I sang along to the radio again while cooking dinner. These small victories became my fuel, proof that I was capable of more than I had ever imagined, and that the woman I used to be was still inside me somewhere, just waiting to be rediscovered. The real test came when Marcus suggested we go out to dinner for his birthday, choosing the same restaurant where he had humiliated me just a month earlier. This time, however, I was ready. Walking back into that same restaurant 6 weeks after the anniversary disaster felt like stepping into a battlefield where I was finally armed and ready to fight. I had lost 15 pounds by then, and while the change wasn't dramatic enough for strangers to notice, I could feel it in the way my clothes fit, in the confidence that had started to bloom in my chest, and in the strength I felt in my legs as I climbed the stairs to the restaurant's entrance. Marcus had chosen this place deliberately. I was certain of it. He wanted to remind me of my humiliation, to keep me in the mental prison he had constructed around my self-worth. But as we were seated at a table just 3 spots away from where our marriage had effectively ended 6 weeks earlier, I realized that his psychological warfare was no longer working on me. The same waitress who had witnessed my previous humiliation approached our table, and I could see the flicker of recognition in her eyes, followed by something that looked almost like concern as she glanced between Marcus and me. The evening unfolded like a strange dance, where Marcus tried to recreate the same dynamic that had worked so effectively before, but found himself pushing against a wall that hadn't been there previously. When he made his first comment about my food choice, suggesting I order something lighter, I calmly informed him that I was perfectly capable of making my own decisions about what to eat. The surprise on his face was almost comical. He had grown so accustomed to my compliance, to my willingness to shrink and apologize and accommodate his every whim, that my newfound assertiveness caught him completely off guard. Throughout the meal, he continued his attempts to undermine my confidence, but each barb seemed to bounce off me harmlessly, as if I had developed some kind of emotional armor over the past month and a half. The other diners who had witnessed my previous humiliation were nowhere to be seen, but I found myself caring less about what strangers thought and more about how I felt about myself. What struck me most profoundly that evening was the realization that Marcus's cruelty hadn't actually been about my weight at all. It had been about his need to control me, to keep me dependent and insecure, so that I would never question his behavior or consider that I deserved better. As I watched him struggle to regain the upper hand in our dynamic, I saw him clearly for perhaps the first time in our entire relationship. He was a man so threatened by the possibility of my independence that he had systematically worked to destroy my self-esteem, using my weight as a convenient weapon because he knew it was my most vulnerable spot. The weight had been real, and the health issues that came with it had been real. But his treatment of me had never been about concern for my well-being. It had been about maintaining his position of power in our relationship. This revelation was both liberating and heartbreaking, because it meant that the man I had loved and married had never actually existed, or had been buried so deep under layers of manipulation and control that he was unrecognizable. By the time we left the restaurant that night, something fundamental had shifted between us, and we both knew it. Marcus had lost his most effective tool for keeping me small, and I had discovered that I was stronger than either of us had ever imagined. The real transformation was just beginning. 3 months into my journey, the changes were becoming impossible to ignore. And not just the 35 pounds I had lost, or the way my size 18 jeans were starting to hang loose around my waist. The transformation was happening from the inside out, rewiring my brain and rebuilding my sense of self in ways that went far beyond physical appearance. My morning routine had become sacred. Up at 5:15 a.m., gym by 5:45, home by 7 to get the kids ready for school. And this consistency had created a foundation of strength that extended into every area of my life. Sarah had graduated me from basic cardio to weight training, and I was amazed to discover muscles I didn't know I had. To feel my body becoming not just smaller, but genuinely strong and capable. The woman who used to get winded walking up a flight of stairs was now deadlifting 135 pounds and running 3 miles without stopping. Achievements that would have seemed impossible just a few months earlier. The changes in my relationship with food had been perhaps the most challenging aspect of this transformation, requiring me to confront decades of emotional eating and the complex relationship between my feelings and my appetite. I had learned to distinguish between physical hunger and the urge to eat for comfort, stress, or boredom. And this awareness had opened up a whole new understanding of how I had been using food to cope with the disappointment and loneliness in my marriage. Meal prep had become a form of meditation, a way of caring for my future self that felt revolutionary after years of grabbing whatever was convenient or eating my children's leftovers while standing at the kitchen counter. The farmer's market on Saturday mornings had become my new favorite place, where I would select fresh vegetables and lean proteins with the same care I used to reserve for choosing the perfect outfit for a special occasion. Marcus's behavior had become increasingly erratic as my confidence grew, and his ability to control me diminished. He oscillated between attempts to sabotage my progress, bringing home my favorite ice cream, or suggesting we order pizza for dinner, and grudging acknowledgement that I was looking better than I had in years. His friends had apparently stopped making jokes about my transformation and had started asking him how I was doing it, which seemed to irritate him more than their previous mockery had. The dynamic in our household had shifted dramatically, with the kids gravitating toward me more often, drawn to my increased energy and improved mood, while Marcus retreated further into his phone and his work. I had started to notice things about our marriage that I had been too exhausted or too focused on survival to see before. The way he never asked about my day, never showed interest in my thoughts or feelings, never contributed to household tasks unless specifically asked. The moment I knew there was no going back came during a parent-teacher conference at Emma's school, where her teacher mentioned how much happier and more confident Emma seemed lately, and how she had been talking about her mom's healthy lifestyle and exercise routine, sitting in that tiny plastic chair in Mrs. Rodriguez's classroom. I realized that my transformation wasn't just about me anymore. It was about showing my children, especially my daughter, what it looked like when a woman valued herself enough to fight for her own happiness and health. That night, I made a decision that had been building for months, but that I finally had the courage to voice. 6 months after that humiliating anniversary dinner, I stood in our bedroom closet holding divorce papers that I had picked up from my attorney's office that afternoon, my hands surprisingly steady despite the magnitude of what I was about to do. The woman staring back at me from the full-length mirror was almost unrecognizable from the broken person who had sat in that restaurant chair, absorbing Marcus's cruelty like a sponge absorbs water. 55 pounds lighter and infinitely stronger, I had discovered that losing weight was just the beginning of reclaiming my life. The real work had been learning to value myself enough to demand better treatment from everyone around me, starting with my husband. The divorce papers felt heavy in my hands, not because I was uncertain about my decision, but because they represented the end of a chapter I had once believed would last forever. The final acknowledgement that some relationships are too toxic to survive no matter how much love you pour into them. Marcus's reaction to my transformation had evolved through several predictable stages over the past few months, each one revealing more about his character than I had ever wanted to know. Initially, he had been dismissive, then sabotaging, then grudgingly admiring, and finally, desperately attentive in a way that felt both too little and too late. He had started complimenting my appearance, suggesting date nights, and even offering to join me at the gym, gestures that might have meant something 6 months earlier, but now felt hollow and manipulative. The man who had publicly humiliated me for my weight was suddenly interested in my body again, but only because it now met his standards of acceptability, not because he had developed any genuine respect for me as a person. His renewed attention felt like another form of control, an attempt to keep me tethered to a relationship that had nearly destroyed my sense of self-worth. And I found myself feeling nothing but pity for someone who could only love conditionally. The children had been my primary concern throughout this entire process, and I had spent countless hours in therapy learning how to navigate divorce in a way that would minimize the impact on Emma and Jake while still modeling healthy boundaries and self-respect. Dr. Martinez, my therapist, had helped me understand that staying in a toxic marriage for the sake of the children was actually more harmful than showing them what it looked like when someone valued themselves enough to leave an unhealthy situation. Emma, now 11 and frighteningly perceptive, had started asking questions about why Daddy was being so nice to Mommy all of a sudden, and whether we were going to stay married forever like her friends' parents who fought all the time but never got divorced. These conversations broke my heart, but also strengthened my resolve, because I realized that my daughter was watching everything, learning what to expect from relationships, and forming her own understanding of what love should look like. The legal process had been surprisingly straightforward, helped by the fact that I had been documenting Marcus's behavior for months and had built a strong case for emotional abuse and financial control. My attorney, a sharp woman named Rebecca Chen, who specialized in cases involving domestic emotional abuse, had been invaluable in helping me understand my rights and options. The house would be sold, the assets divided, and I would have primary custody of the children, with Marcus getting them every other weekend and one evening per week. I had already found a small 3-bedroom house in a good school district, close enough to the gym that had become my sanctuary and to the support network I had built over the past 6 months. The thought of starting over at 38 was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. But I knew that the woman who had lost 60 pounds and found her strength was capable of handling whatever came next. That evening, I waited until the children were asleep before presenting Marcus with the papers that would officially end our marriage. The conversation that followed the presentation of those divorce papers was unlike anything we had ever experienced in our 8 years of marriage, marked by a desperation from Marcus that I had never witnessed before, and a calm certainty from me that surprised us both. He cycled through every emotion imaginable: anger, disbelief, bargaining, and finally a kind of panic that made him promise changes he should have made years earlier. Commitments to therapy and behavior modification that felt like closing the barn door after the horses had already escaped. For the first time in our relationship, I held all the power, and watching him scramble to regain control was both satisfying and deeply sad, because it confirmed that he had never truly seen me as an equal partner, but rather as something he owned and could manipulate at will. The man who had publicly humiliated me for my weight was now begging me to reconsider, promising to love me at any size, swearing that my transformation had shown him how wrong he had been. But his words felt empty, because they were motivated by fear of loss rather than genuine remorse or understanding. The next few months passed in a blur of legal meetings, real estate showings, and difficult conversations with Emma and Jake about why Mommy and Daddy wouldn't be living together anymore. I had reached my goal weight of 152 pounds by then, having lost a total of 88 pounds. But more importantly, I had gained something infinitely more valuable: an unshakable sense of my own worth that no one could ever take away from me again. The physical transformation had been remarkable, but the mental and emotional changes were what truly mattered. The way I carried myself with confidence, the way I spoke up for myself in meetings at work, the way I refused to accept less than I deserved in any area of my life. My children adapted to our new normal with the resilience that kids possess, and I made sure they understood that the divorce was about grown-up problems that had nothing to do with them, that both parents loved them completely, and that sometimes families look different but love remains constant. Marcus's attempts to win me back became increasingly desperate as the reality of our separation set in, and he seemed genuinely shocked that his renewed attention and promises of change weren't enough to repair the damage he had inflicted over years of emotional abuse. He had apparently expected that losing weight would make me more attractive to him, but hadn't considered that it might also make me more attractive to myself, more confident in my own value, and less willing to accept his treatment. The irony wasn't lost on me that the very transformation he had demanded through his cruelty was what ultimately gave me the strength to leave him, that his attempts to control me had backfired spectacularly and freed me instead. Friends and family members who had watched our marriage deteriorate over the years expressed amazement at my transformation, not just physical, but in terms of confidence and self-assurance, and many admitted they had been worried about me for years but hadn't known how to help. The day I moved into my new house was one of the most liberating experiences of my adult life. Surrounded by boxes containing only the things I had chosen to keep, in a space that was entirely mine to decorate and organize as I saw fit. Emma and Jake helped me unpack, excited about their new bedrooms and the small backyard where we could plant a garden together. And for the first time in years, our home felt peaceful and happy rather than tense and walking on eggshells careful. That night, after the kids were asleep in their new rooms, I sat on my front porch with a cup of tea and marveled at how different my life looked compared to a year earlier. How the woman who had been humiliated in that restaurant had found the strength to completely rebuild her existence from the ground up. 1 year after that devastating anniversary dinner, I found myself back at the same restaurant, but this time I was there by choice, celebrating my birthday with Emma, Jake, and my sister Lisa, who had flown in from Denver to mark this milestone with me. The irony of returning to the scene of my greatest humiliation as a celebration of my rebirth wasn't lost on any of us, and I had chosen this place deliberately as a way of reclaiming a space that had once held so much pain and transforming it into something positive. The same blonde waitress who had witnessed my humiliation was working that night, and when she recognized me, her face lit up with genuine amazement and what looked like pride, as if she had been rooting for me all along and was thrilled to see how the story had turned out. At 152 pounds and radiating confidence in a way that had nothing to do with my dress size, I was living proof that transformation is possible when you finally decide you deserve better than what you've been accepting. The children had adapted beautifully to our new life, thriving in ways that confirmed I had made the right decision in leaving their father. Emma had joined the soccer team at school and was excelling both academically and socially, while Jake had discovered a love for art that I encouraged by enrolling him in weekend classes at the community center. Our small house had become a haven of laughter, healthy meals, and genuine connection, free from the tension and walking on eggshells atmosphere that had characterized our previous home. Marcus saw them every other weekend as mandated by our custody agreement, and while those transitions were sometimes difficult, both kids had expressed relief that Mommy and Daddy didn't fight anymore, and that our house felt happy now. The guilt I had initially felt about breaking up their family had been replaced by pride in showing them what it looked like when someone valued themselves enough to pursue happiness and health. My transformation had ripple effects that extended far beyond my personal life, inspiring friends and coworkers to make their own changes and leading to opportunities I never could have imagined when I was trapped in my previous existence. I had been promoted at work, started a blog about healthy living and self-empowerment that was gaining a following, and even begun dating again, though I was taking that very slowly and prioritizing my own healing and my children's adjustment. The woman who had once believed she deserved to be humiliated in public had discovered that she was worthy of love, respect, and all the good things life had to offer. As I sat in that restaurant surrounded by people who truly cared about me, I realized that Marcus's cruelty had inadvertently given me the greatest gift of all, the motivation to save myself and create the life I had always deserved, but had been too afraid to pursue. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the catalyst for the best thing that ever happens to you, and I was living proof that it's never too late to start over and become who you were always meant to be.